Hello everyone, welcome to Crystal Diaries. This is another video of a series of videos relating to law of contracts in India. And in this video, we are going to learn about free consent. In our previous videos, if you remember, we have actually discussed about the essential elements of a valid contract, out of which free consent is also an essential element of it. So I have made two videos. This is the part 1 of free consent. So let us begin, but before that, as I say, please bring your Barrect, a notebook and a pen so that we can write down the important points, whatever we discuss, and read the Barrect simultaneously. So let us begin. So the important provision with respect to free consent in the Contract Act is Section 13. So Section 13 defines consent. It says two or more persons are said to consent when they agree upon the same thing in the same sense. So it talks about two things. What? Same thing and in the same sense. So it is based on the maxim consensus ad idem, which means same thing and same sense. Now let me give you an example. Suppose A agrees to sell his house to B. Now A owns 3 houses and wants to sell his house in Delhi. Now B thinks that he is buying his Kolkata house. Here A and B have not agreed upon the same thing in the same sense. Therefore, there is no consent and therefore there is no contract afterwards. So, therefore, it is very essential that two or more parties should agree upon the same thing and in the same sense. Now, let me give you the example of a case law, that is Bala Devi versus Manum Dutts. So, in this case, there was an illiterate lady and she signs a gift deed mistaking it for a power of attorney. So, in this case, there was no consent because they did not agree in the same sense, because she was thinking it to be a power of attorney, but she was actually signing in a gift deed. So in this case, since they both did not agree the same thing in the same sense, the contract was void. Now let us understand what is free consent. So section 14 is the important provision which says that consent is said to be free when it is not caused by, first, coercion as defined in section 15, or second, undue influence as defined in section 16, or third, fraud as defined in section 17, or fourth, misrepresentation as defined in section 18, or fifth, mistake subject to the provisions of sections 20, 21 and 22. So as you can see, there are 5 things. If these 5 things are present in the consent, then the consent is not free. What is this? What are those? They are coercion, undue influence, fraud, misrepresentation, mistake. So all these things have been defined in the respective sections, as you can see in 15, 16, 17, 18, 20, 21 and 22. So we are going to learn about each of this in the next video, but let us first understand the importance of free consent in a valid contract. So now it says consent is said to be so caused when it would not have been given but for the existence of such coercion, undue influence, fraud, misrepresentation or mistake. So when there is a consent, it is very important that all these factors should be absent. Which factors? Coercion, undue influence, fraud, misrepresentation and mistake. So if any of this element is present while taking the consent of a person, then that is not a valid contract. Now the question comes, what happens if there is no free consent? Is it void or is it voidable? Let us find out. So there are 3 circumstances, or there are 3 consequences that can happen if there is no free consent. The first one is voidable at the option of the party whose consent was caused by coercion, fraud, misrepresentation. So for this you need to read section 19. So section 19 says that if the consent of a party was caused by coercion, fraud or misrepresentation, in this case the contract will be voidable. Voidable by whom? By the party from whom the consent was taken, by applying coercion, fraud or misrepresentation. Okay, now let us understand this with the help of an illustration. So A, intending to deceive B, falsely represents that 500 mounds of indigo are made annually at A's factory and thereby induces B to buy the factory. The contract is voidable at the option of B. Why? Because he has inserted the element of fraud here. He fraudulently say that. Now by using fraud, he obtained the consent of B. So in this case, this contract is void. Now let us see another example. A is entitled to succeed an estate at the death of B. B dies. C, having received intelligence of B's death, prevents intelligence reaching A and thus induces A to sell him his interest in the estate. The sale is voidable at the option of A. So in this case, he has actually misrepresented. He has actually fraudulently done that. He has not misrepresented, but he has fraudulently done that. So in this case, the contract is voidable. So the second consequence that can happen if there is no free consent is it is voidable and it can be set aside either absolutely or partly when caused by undue influence. Now the relevant section is section 19 capital A. It says that if someone has obtained the consent from another person by undue influence on that person, so that is voidable now, and it can be set aside. It can be set aside either absolutely or partly. Why absolutely and partly I am saying? Because absolutely means that the contract has become voidable at the option of the person from whom the consent was obtained through undue influence, and that person is now desiring that you please set aside the contract. So in that case, he will totally set aside the contract. Nobody has to fulfill any kind of obligation. But there are circumstances when the person from whom the undue influence or the person on whom undue influence was done to obtain his consent has received some benefits. So although he has received some benefits, but still he was under undue influence. So since he has taken some benefit, so it can be partly set aside. Okay. Let us understand this with the help of illustrations. See, A's son has forged B's name to promissory note. B, under threat of prosecuting A's son, obtains a bond from A for the amount of the forged note. If B sues on this bond, the court may set aside the bond. Why? Because he has applied undue influence here. Okay. So in this case, this can be set aside by the court. Now another example is a money lender advances rupees 100 to B, an agriculturist, and by undue influence induces B to execute a bond for rupees 200 with interest at 6%. The court may set aside the bond, ordering B to repay the rupees 100 with such interest as may seem just. So in this case, you can see that he has actually employed undue influence since they are not at the same position. Since one of the party is at dominant position, he has employed undue influence upon that person who has taken money. Now, what did the court do? The court did not say that the entire contract is void right now. No, it cannot be, because that person has taken some amount of money. So in this case, he has to repay the money, but not rupees 200 with 6% of interest, but rupees 100 as the principal amount, and the interest whatever seems just in the view of the court. Now we are done with two consequences, and let us see the third consequence if the consent is not free. The agreement will be void where both parties are under mistake as to matter of fact. So the important section in this behalf is section 20. So if the consent has been obtained or there is a free consent between two parties, but both the parties are under the mistake of fact, then in that case the agreement becomes void. You can see the above two cases where the consent was obtained through fraud, coercion, undue influence, or misrepresentation. It was voidable at the option of the party, of one of the party from whom such consent was taken. But in the case of mistake, it is void when both the parties are under the mistake. Now let us understand this with the help of illustration. See, A agrees to sell to B a specific cargo of goods supposed to be on its way from England to Bombay. It turns out that before the day of bargain, the ship conveying the cargo had been cast away and the goods lost. So neither of the party was aware of this fact, so the agreement is void. So by the time they were both entering into the agreement, the ship had cast away and the goods were lost. So both were under the mistake of facts that the ship existed, there will be conveyance, the goods will be imported or exported, whatever. So on that basis they made the contract. But in actual, the fact is something different. The ship has been cast away and no more goods like that exist. So in this case, the agreement is void. Now the other example is A agrees to buy from B a certain horse. It turns out that the horse was dead at the time of the bargain, though neither party was aware of the fact. The agreement is void. So in this case, again, there was what? There was mistake as to matter of fact. None of them knew that the horse was dead, but they made a contract with each other. So in this case, since there is a mistake as to the matter of fact, the contract becomes void. Now the last example, A being entitled to an estate for the life of B agrees to sell it to C. B was dead at the time of the agreement, but both the parties were ignorant of the fact. So the agreement is void. So I hope you understood the importance of free consent and where consent and free consent have been defined and what happens if there is no free consent in the contract. So in the next videos, we are going to learn about coercion, undue influence, fraud, misrepresentation and mistake in detail. But till then, you please revise this and practice these videos. And for other videos, you can check my playlist on Indian Contract Act in my channel. And till then, take care and bye-bye.